In this chapter, we will learn how to send models from Zbrush to Keyshot with UV mapping intact. We will also learn the basic setup, functions, and features of Keyshot, as well as some important differences between the HD and Pro versions of Keyshot. For those of you that are familiar with using Keyshot and also sending models from Zbrush with UVW maps to Keyshot, I recommend that you move on to the next chapter. For everyone else that's using Keyshot for the first time or wants to know some of the basics or extra tips, then go ahead and watch this chapter. The first thing I want to talk to you guys about are the very different versions of Keyshot. So what I'm going to show you guys right now, most likely those of you that have Keyshot 7 that are using ZBrush have Keyshot 7 for ZBrush, which is a version that's a little bit different from the Keyshot Pro versions. The thing that I want to explain to you guys that's really important is that if you have the Keyshot 7 HD version for ZBrush and not the Keyshot 7 Pro version for ZBrush, then within Keyshot itself, you are not going to be able to edit materials or make your own materials, which is going to be an important part of the next process. Uh, so that's just one of the requirements for moving forward if you want to be able to create your own materials. So keep that in mind as you're working with this in Keyshot. If you have it at home, if you're not able to make materials, you'll know why, and I will demonstrate that in a few minutes. Some of you at home, you may actually have Keyshot HD and Keyshot Pro. These are more expensive versions of Keyshot where you can actually send OBJs and things like that over from other programs like Maya, Max, etc. But these are some good resources. I'll link them in the YouTube link, and then otherwise they're in a links folder within the downloadable material where you can see these different comparisons of what the products do. So back in ZBrush, I want to show you guys really quick. If we were to hit this BPR button right now, it's just going to do the standard default rendering that's within ZBrush. Now, if we were to go up here to render, and then we click external renderer, if you have Keyshot installed and you have the Keyshot, the bridge to Keyshot, this will be enabled. So if you click this, the next time we hit BPR, it'll send this over to Keyshot. I'm getting confused. So what I'm mentioning about is the bridge. The bridge is a separate tool. So for those of you that might have a standalone version of Keyshot because you don't use it with ZBrush that often, you could buy this Keyshot bridge, you install that into ZBrush, and then it'll allow you to send the model seamlessly over to Keyshot. So let's go ahead and do that. So now that we've set this up with the external renderer, we can just hit the BPR button. And in a minute, you'll see up here it says ZBrush to Keyshot bridge, and it's sending it over. It'll take a minute to set up depending on your complexity. So right away you can see this is the default setup that we have within Keyshot. Your screen might look a little bit different. If so, that's because you might up here in the top left have the startup version of this setup where you don't see many of the menus. What I recommend, I always use the default setting. I come up here and then I set this to default. And then you can have all of your different menus, etc. on the left and right. That's what we're going to be using during the tutorial, so I recommend you set it up that way. Another thing to just quickly talk to you guys about is how we're going to be using the viewport. It's pretty simple. Left click is what rotates. Middle mouse button will help you pan. If you need to zoom in and out, you hold down Alt on your keyboard and right click to move in and out to get a smooth zoom in and out. Or you could do a stepping with, if you have a mouse wheel, you could roll in and out. I prefer to use the right click. The other thing too, up here on the top left, since Keyshot is a progressive render and it's a CPU-based render, this will tell you how many cores on your CPU it's going to use. I only have 16 cores on my computer, and if I was to click this, then it will tell my computer to use all cores towards rendering this model as quickly as possible. A lot of times, if I have quite a few different programs open, which I usually do, I'll set this down to something like 88%, and that way it reserves some system RAM and information for my other programs, because it can get laggy and crash at times depending on the complexity of your model. This one's not too crazy, so I don't expect it would be problematic. So progressive renderers, for those of you that are using Keyshot for the first time, or you've used other programs like Redshift, or even V-Ray has a progressive mode. Progressive mode basically means that the computer will keep rendering in real time and cleaning up the model and the render as you see it. So you're seeing all this noise right now, and then it's just progressively rendering and getting this cleaner. We can set it later to do really pretty renders up here. which will kind of work like a traditional render. But this is the power of Keyshot, being able to see everything so quickly and move around it. So that's what I like using. These top menus I rarely use myself because I just know all the shortcuts, which I kind of explained to you, and a lot of the stuff I just don't need to use. The other thing I'll quickly explain to you is some of the menus that I use a lot. By the way, I am not a true pro with Keyshot. I do this as a hobby in my spare time, so I'm sure I'm going to probably get some stuff wrong, and but I think it'll be useful for most of you. So over here on the left, one of the things we have is a material section. It may look a little different for you guys depending on how you have it set up. For example, down here in the bottom, this is how I'm viewing my thumbnails. If I click this one on the left, you can do a cascade version such as this. I kind of like having this one so I can see more. Your materials, depending how your Keyshot is set up, you may not have as many as me. For example, I've made some custom folders, which we're going to be doing later in this tutorial, such as this Amulet folder, or for example, one that says Australia, um, or Dark Souls 3. This is from when I was doing that High Lord of Honor goblet. And anyways, you can always just click through here and check all the different things out. And basically, anytime you want to try out a material, you just literally drag and drop onto your model in your scene, and you can get some different stuff on there really quickly. So I'm just going to drop like maybe a plastic on here for now because I think it looks interesting. The other thing, colors, I don't really use this that much. Some of you might. I use texture quite a bit. Later in this tutorial, you'll see me using these textures. For example, in here, you can see some of our textures that we created previously that are preloaded into my scene. I think this is from an old scene file, but we're going to be pulling in our textures and some others in a bit. Environment, we're going to be using this one quite a bit. There's a bunch of different settings depending on what version of Keyshot you have. I bought it early on with Zbrush, and I ended up getting a whole suite of different nice HDRI maps that Zbrush provided as well. You guys might not have those, but you should have a pretty good setup that's standard out of the box that I'll try to stick to whenever I'm doing this tutorial if you have it. And the way that the environments work is you can just double click on any of these, or you can kind of drag and drop them into the scene as well. And what these are doing, for those of you familiar with HDRI lighting, is it's taking a map and it's using the color and light information from the map in order to drive the lighting of the scene. So for example, when you see a map like this, you can see those really hot points in the ceiling. Those lights are going to be brighter whenever you're looking at your model. And as you rotate around this, you can see how light will affect it differently based on how things are arranged. I'm going to click an outdoor one because that'll more clearly illustrate the point. And here, for example, you can see the little sun that's down here. The sun is somewhere over here on the right of this image. And that's, of course, illuminating and creating the shadow that's falling back this way. Now, one thing that you guys might want to do is I like to come over here underneath environment on the right over here by our scene setup. And you can come here and you can play with like rotation of the light. It's not rotating anything in the scene, it's just rotating the HDRI map. What I want you to recognize is watch where the shadow moves after I rotate this. You can see that I'm actually rotating the light source, which is the sun. And just think of this image as like a big dome or a cylinder that's in our scene rotating around this amulet as a centerpiece. And you can do different things too, such as adjusting the brightness and the contrast. I usually don't do this, but you can. So for example, if we bring this up, it gets really blown out and hot, or you can bring things down and just kind of adjust them subtly. Usually pretty good to keep that at default. Other thing that you can switch around between, which I like to do, is a lot of times I just have a standard background color. So instead of the lighting environment, click color, and now you can see it'll change the background color to a variety of different interesting colors that you can choose from. You can change it pure black if you wanted. I'm going to keep it at a mid-gray for right now. Other thing that you can do too, if you wanted a backplate image, you could choose your own from different folders. It's not necessary for me. Um, shadows, things like that, by default it has ground shadows on. You could click that off and now it just feels like this model's floating in world space, which can be kind of nice for clean renders. The other thing, it keeps changing color. I'm not sure why. Oh, it's because I'm not saying okay. That's off the screen here. Okay, there we go. So the other thing that you can do too is lighting up here can be useful. I'm not going to play around with this too much right now, but later I will as we're increasing the quality of our renders. One of the things that you might want to include would be global illumination. That'll get us some nicer shadows inside the center points. It's not really obvious here right now, but it is overall nice to have whenever you're doing a really clean render. As we're playing around in real time, I prefer to keep this off. And I usually keep these default settings that are set up under basic mode right now in order to get the quickest results possible. All right, the other thing too, scene file. Think of this kind of like your subtool browser in Zbrush. If you click this down here, you can see that it's brought in our different models from Zbrush. And usually what I do is I'll go down here and I'll change the name of these really quickly. For example, this one I can call Stone. And for our other one, we can call that Amulet. From the scenes panel, you can do a variety of things. For example, you see this eyeball. We could click that to hide that point. Um, you could click the root, this subtool up here, or the container, I guess, of the amulet and the stone, which is called Zbrush, and then you could hide them both simultaneously. There's a bunch of different things you can do later, like right-clicking any of these will give you some different options. Sometimes it's nice to say center and fit. Um, if you have a whole bunch of objects in your scene and you want to orbit around one, that's a pretty useful feature to use. But we're not going to play around with that too much at the moment. So we've talked about materials, environments, backgrounds. Like I said, again, I don't usually mess with this too much. You can if you want to, drag and drop those in here. Favorites, this is something I don't really mess with either. I think some of the other things that I should just quickly show you is what I was talking about previously with being able to create and edit materials. So right now, let's click on the material button that we have up here. You can see by default we have this paint gloss blue. This is the one I dragged onto here. And then we have the shader that came over from Zbrush. So this shader is, well, any of these shaders actually, if you right click them and you come down here to edit material graph, this window will pop up if you have the pro version of Keyshot. And I'm sorry to have to keep repeating this over and over. I just don't want it to be frustrating for someone. If you have, again, HD version, you're probably not going to have that material graph. If you have the pro version, you will. And this is something that we're going to be relying on pretty heavily moving forward because we're going to create all of our own materials. So that being said, I do want to show you a couple more things as we get this set up. Within here, later, you'll be able to, it's all node based, you'll be able to plug in different textures and maps as we start to work with things here that are pretty useful. And then you'll be able to drag and drop anything into all these different settings. So for example, right now we're affecting a material that's on top of our stone. And I plugged in this different texture map into the diffuse section. Originally it was from Zbrush. Now we can replace this. You see everything update in real time. That's one thing that I love about using Zbrush and Keyshot, how quickly things update in real time. The other thing that I want to show you that's really important is, remember back in Zbrush, we spent a lot of time creating really nice UV maps for each of these models. So that one, we could place things properly, such as the Mount Fuji symbol that we had here. And in fact, let's just turn that on, texture map, texture on. You can remember we also built up the dirt around this. And then on our other one here, we had done stuff where we had the different mix masks that we've extracted based on the UV templates that are created there. So I'm going to turn that on as well. And right now, as you remember, we just had a default checker. Don't worry about what map is on there. It's just important to have a texture turned on for both of these. And here's the reason why. If you don't have texture turned on whenever you send these over to Zbrush using the Keyshot bridge, it will strip your UVW maps from your subtools. And we're going to need those whenever we are texturing our model. To illustrate this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and find that dirt mask that we had for our amulet right here. So just give me a moment. I'm going to pause the video so I can find that. Okay, so I found our mask. For those of you, most of you have probably saved one already. We had the gem dirt mask. And another nice thing about Keyshot is you can literally just drag and drop from a window into your material graph editor. So that's what we're going to do. If we wanted to do it by hand, we could have also come in here and said right click, textures, click on texture map, and then you can double click that node at any point, and you can also load things in here through the properties section of the file browser, gem dirt mask, and we can pull that as well. So now we have quite a few. I'm just going to clean up this a little bit because it's getting busy. And at any point, you can just click on one of these and delete them, which I'm doing right now. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to drag and drop this into our diffuse section. And what I want you to notice is the texture mapping is not matching perfectly. And by default, the mapping type that's on all of our objects is going to be box mode mapping. What you would want to do is change this to UV, but the problem is since we didn't have, the first time we sent this over, we didn't have texture map on within the section, so it didn't retain the UVs as we sent them over. So what I'm going to illustrate now is I'm going to update this gem and send it back over, both of these with texture maps. And afterwards, we're going to pull this back in, and then you should see this line up perfectly once we have UV selected. By the way, there are different settings that you can use if you wanted to, like a planar, for example. This is a planar map that's falling on here, so you can see that it's just something you would need to adjust the width and parameters if you wanted to try and make it work. You could eyeball it, but that's not what we want to do. So I'm going to go ahead and close this material graph. Let's go back into Zbrush. And the thing that's cool is since we have the Zbrush bridge, it's automatically connecting to Zbrush and you can update it. So now that we've turned on these textures, I'm going to click BPR again. And now it's sending it back to Keyshot. You can see here it's updating our file. And now you can see that the maps have actually come through. So not only can you get the materials that have the maps on them from Zbrush, more importantly, we now have the UVW map information on top of these models. And I'm going to illustrate that in just a second. So let's go over here to material. Let's just drag this glossy blue onto both of these, which now has overridden the previous material that came from Zbrush and had the texture map on it. So if we go in here, let's say edit material graph. I honestly don't know which one is on here, if it's the Amulet or the other, so let's find out. Let's go ahead and drag and drop that gem dirt mask into our scene again. Now let's just plug that right into the paint section, or sorry, the color section. So we can see that this is on the Amulet. So let's double click the texture map. And then over here in our texture map properties, let's switch the mapping type to UV. Now you see that it matches perfectly within here. Previously, remember, it was just off kilter a little bit, and that's because technically this did not have UVW maps on it. I think a way that we can even more clearly illustrate this is with the model back here. So let's go ahead and I think this was called, I'm going to double click this paint. I'm going to node name, let's call this stone for now. I'm going to close this and then let's right click and edit material graph for the other one here. And let's find one of those previous texture maps. So Amulet Dirt from Zbrush. Remember we created those. Let's drag that into our scene and let's plug that in. And we should see that match. Well, it doesn't match perfectly right now because remember by default this is set to box mapping mode. So double click. Now that we're selected with the Amulet section, mapping type from box, let's change that to UV. And now you see it matches everything perfectly. And these are going to be great later because we're going to be using these values to switch between different material types such as dirt and then clean metal. But once again, I want to illustrate, and I just really want to show this to you guys so it gets through. For those of you that get it, you can just go ahead and stop now and jump on to the next chapter, but I'm just going to show one more time. I'm going to go back to Zbrush. I'm going to select the subtool, that's the Amulet part here. Let's turn off the texture. I'm going to keep it on for the stone and off for this one. I'm going to send this back over one more time. And now we can see it's got the new materials because each time it will bring the material from Zbrush over. Well, it looks like it kept it for our paint here because we didn't change anything on the Amulet. Basically, if you don't change something within Zbrush, it won't update it and send it. Another thing I can kind of show you, which is interesting too, actually, let's just do this. I'm going to change to the move brush. And I'm just going to distort some things so that you can see how well that Keyshot bridge works. So now you're going to see this actually update the model. So it's kind of funny. But anyways, I still want to just illustrate really clearly that texture map portion. So remember a second ago, because we had texture map on, it kept our UVW maps on this. And now that we don't have this, let's go through and attempt to add the material in here. So edit, material graph. Let's find that mask again. Let's drag that in here. We're going to plug that into the diffuse. Of course, it's going to be funny anyways, because by default, it's got that box setting. But now if we go to UV, you can see that it doesn't work. You get like this pure black. And if you get a pure black, that's a pretty good representation that maybe the UVs did not come over. So just a really good lesson. You guys will probably do this a few times during your workflows and wonder what's going on whenever you're trying to use UV maps. That's the secret to it. Other than that, guys, we are ready to actually start production. So I'm going to close all this, and then we're going to go back to a clean Zbrush file and a clean Keyshot file and officially get started on creating materials and making a really nice looking amulet. This tutorial and its downloadable content is available now on my QBrush, Gumroad, and Steam stores, which are linked in the description below. Watch the following video to see what is included with your purchase. If you purchase this tutorial, here is a preview of all the bonus content you will receive. Firstly, in Zbrush, I've included 3 different versions of the amulet. 1, my final sculpted version with all the ornamentational details and destruction. 2, just the sculptural details like ornamentation. 3, a version without anything so you could follow along and create your own during the process. Secondly, you will receive the final Keyshot file demonstrated here, which contains all of the texture maps, lighting, and everything that is shown during the tutorial. The thing that I find really useful about this is having access to the material graph and seeing the complex custom materials that are created during the tutorial. This will really help you with understanding how to create your own complex materials in Keyshot. Next, you will receive all of the final PSD files showcased throughout the tutorial, including this gold-painted Mount Fuji design with all of my different layering processes, as well as the custom crest base that is used later for sculpting in ZBrush based off of masks. Also, you'll get all of the final texture maps that are showcased during the tutorial, such as these, which are all tileable. You will also receive all of the original videos in downloaded format at their full high definition resolution. Also, I have included dozens of high quality personal art images such as my Dark Souls 3 High Lord of Walnor fan art, which inspired me to create the Amulet tutorial to showcase the techniques I learned and developed during the process. Whether you purchase this tutorial or follow along for free on Facebook or YouTube, thank you for your continued support, and I cannot wait to see the epic amulets you create soon.